Hey, what's going on everyone? I hope you're doing well. In this video, I will be talking about how I managed to reach Grandmaster 1, and hopefully provide you with some useful insight and advice. The video will be broken down into two parts. Part 1, Advice and Tips. My original plan was to create a video where I slowly weaved in tips and advice whilst talking about my own experiences, but in the end, I realised it'd be more beneficial to present any useful information at the start of the video, rather than dragging out the entire process. Part 2, a record of my journey. Honestly, I couldn't think of a less pretentious but more appropriate way to describe what is essentially a chronological tale of me climbing the ranks in AIM Labs. The best way to rank up is to first understand how the system works. When you first start AIM Labs, you are presented with an initial assessment to determine your rank placement. This rank can be viewed in the profile section of AIM Labs, along with the 6 scores that make up your rank. Blicking, tracking, speed, precision, perception, and cognition. Your profile data is the perfect starting point to building a routine to help you climb and understand where and how you can improve. The fastest way to climb the ranks is to focus on your weakest attribute, but the best way is to simply play as many tasks as possible in each of the 6 task types. I found that scoring amazingly in a single task was less effective for climbing than only scoring adequately in multiple tasks. AIM Labs only assesses the data from your 5 best performances in a task and uses that information to assign you a rank/score in that category. Therefore, the more tasks you play, the better your chances are of improving your rank. Speed is something you naturally develop over time. You want to focus more on your precision and accuracy, taking your time with each shot to ensure it lands. You will naturally start to get quicker and quicker with enough practice as you gain confidence. The fastest way for you to improve is to be consistent with your practice. Try to play at least once a day, but if that's not possible, try to find the time when you can, taking into consideration unavoidable factors like work or school, and building a routine around your existing schedule. Don't get stressed if you miss a day or longer. Try to get back into routine when you can. The shortest distance between 2 points is a line, and it's also the most efficient path you can take from target to target. Try to get into the habit of straightening your crosshair movement whilst being aware of any over and under flicking you may be doing. Tasks like line trace and multi-line trace are a great way to improve this. You should also get used to snapping to a central point, also known as resetting your aim. Typically, the best point to keep your aim neutral at is the point where the head hitbox lands on the screen. You don't want to be staring into the sky when an enemy swings on you out of the blue. There are a couple of tasks in AIM Labs that practice this, such as Spider Shot and the appropriately named Headshot and Headshot Reflex. For tasks where the targets are in motion, try to envision the trajectory of the target. The Star Track task set is a great example of what I mean by visualizing the target's movement, and with time you will also gain an understanding of movement patterns. For tasks when you can easily move about in the range, I would recommend you try moving constantly, as it's more realistic to the in-game scenario, and it helps to build up the synergy between your crosshair and your character's movement. Mirroring and anti-mirroring are a common form of movement pattern in most FPS games. Moving around helps you to realize the impact a character's movement speed has on your ability to aim. Movement is an important factor in all FPS titles. Even in the slower paced games such as Counter-Strike and Valorant, you still need to be able to navigate around a map and counter-strafe. Try to figure out a path for your crosshair to take. You should always be looking for where you're aiming next using your peripheral, going from target to target like stepping stones across a river. Look for the grouping and plan ahead. It is easier to achieve a higher score when you're constantly dealing with groupings, and avoid isolated targets as much as possible, only jumping to them if they're within the same direction as your next grouping. For targets that take more than one shot to kill, try to get into the habit of multi-clicking, starting with double-clicking, then triple-clicking, building up further beyond. Eventually, you'll get into a rhythm and learn the pattern of the target. For example, you may have enough time to hit a target twice or even 3 times before you have to react to its change in direction. Other situations where I would recommend trying to double or multi-click is where you have 2 or more targets adjacent to one another, moving your crosshair from one target to the next in the small moment between your clicks. You've probably seen clips of pros playing scenarios such as 6-shot, rapidly clicking between the targets that are within close proximity of one another. Don't get fixated on a single target. Even on high-scoring runs, you'll see the player jumping from target to target, and if they miss, they'll spend slightly more time and focus on a second shot before moving on, even if they miss again. Often, you'll be able to jump back to the missed target if it's within reasonable range. I often get fixated on missing a single target, and then it begins to snowball as you get inside your own head. What you focus on changes depending on the scenario. For small or far away targets, you should be focusing more on your crosshair, taking your time and making sure you are spot on when you hit them. Whereas for targets that are closer or larger, you should be looking past your crosshair and widening your peripheral, looking for where your crosshair should move next. Get into the practice of focusing your vision in and out and keeping it centered. I found in Aim Labs the best tasks for helping with aim correction were reactive track precision and microflick. Arc tracking is a good way to highlight if your sensitivity and desk space are appropriate. It is important to be able to use your full range of motions in games like Apex Legends and Overwatch, where targets often move both horizontally and vertically at the same time. Aim Labs is excellent at highlighting how you are improving. It tries to make it clear with each performance where you have grown and performed better than your average. There'll be times where you are in a slump, but Aim Labs tries to show you that for every step back you are taking, you're still taking 2 forwards. It's important to tell yourself that your worst performance will still be better than your first in some capacity as you continue to gain experience. If you are getting anxious or start to worry when you play, you need to ask yourself why and try to figure out what the problem is. Take a step back, take a deep breath and try to slow yourself down, calming your nerves. Hesitation will often be your downfall. If you fail, learn from your mistakes and don't dwell on them. Visualize the best outcome and give yourself the self-confidence you need to achieve your goals. But it is also important to be realistic. Whatever your end goal is, halve your expectations, then halve that again, and that is what you should be aiming for. Greatness is achieved in small steps, and with each step, you're getting closer to your goals. Customization is crucial. You need to feel comfortable with your setup inside the game and in person. There isn't a magical crosshair, color, style, or shape that will make you automatically better. You need to find what best works for you. I would highly recommend customizing any and every aspect of Aim Labs you can, especially if it's having an impact on your gameplay. For me, this was disabling the view model and the miss/damage indicator. There was nothing worse for me than being in the middle of a run and losing track of my target because it was being obscured by my view model, or getting distracted by the fact my screen would flash red every time I missed a shot. I would highly recommend regularly updating your playlist. Mixing up your regime can help reduce stagnation and reignite an interest in what you're doing. You could try to modify and adjust your routine to the results of your previous performances. For example, rearranging the order or incorporating more tasks in the aspect you're struggling the most with. I'd only recommend recording and watching a VOD of yourself playing Aim Labs if you're passionate enough as well as have the time to do so. It may be more beneficial and easier to rewatch your performance in your favourite game. I encourage you to watch pros and high score runs for Aim Labs to see how they achieve said scores, but generally I would say it's more effective for you to watch how you play in another game. Many titles come with an inbuilt replay system already, making it easier for you to access your previous matches. I've seen a variety of interviews with various FPS pros talking about how they would mimic the playstyles of older players they admired and adapt it to try and give themselves a unique edge over the competition. Playstyle, in a way, is like art. You imitate what you love and find your own angle. Something else you could look out for is any footage of a pro using an eye tracker whilst in game to learn what they do and where they look in a situation. The key to finding your sensitivity is a balance between practicality and preference. It is a combination of control and comfort. I would recommend setting your sensitivity to something similar to what you're already comfortable with in another game, although occasionally changing your sensitivity slightly can be beneficial. If you're trying to find a sensitivity, go into the practice/training area inside your game of choice and try these two things. Firstly, find 2 points to flick between, ensuring you can do it comfortably both whilst you're stood stationary and moving. Secondly, find a single point to focus on, moving around as much as possible, seeing if you can keep your crosshair locked to the point. Ergonomics is the most important factor to any setup, and something I would encourage you dedicate time to researching further as it impacts your health, especially if you're spending most of your day behind a desk. Your posture affects the angle your arm rests at, which may limit the range of motion your arm can make. If you're struggling to move your arm, you may need to raise your chair or lower your desk. How you hold your mouse can make your aim feel jittery or restricted. If you feel your aim is jittering, it may be because you are curling your fingers and gripping it with your fingertips, rather than letting it rest within your palm. If you feel restricted in moving your mouse, it may be because you're gripping the mouse too hard and the fingers on the side of your mouse are creating friction. There are two components to aiming with a mouse: your arm/elbow and your hand/wrist. The purpose of the arm and elbow is to cover the broader strokes of motion, such as swiping from one side of the screen to the other, whilst the hand and wrist are more for micro corrections, adjustments, and other minor crosshair movements. How much your arm versus how much your wrist affects your aim depends on how high your sensitivity. For those of you with a high sense, I would recommend finding a perfect place to set your arm, like a pivot point to work around. The benefits of having a high sense is you can easily flick, but at the potential loss of accuracy, which is why I would recommend taking a brief moment to ensure you're on target before each shot. For people with a low sense, I would recommend learning the limitations of your space and how much you can move your mouse whilst in it. I would also recommend getting into the practice of recentering your mouse when you can in-game. You don't want your mouse to be lingering at the edge, restricting your movement. But the benefits of having a low sense is you have more control overall and much smoother motions, therefore you are less likely to overflick. Sensitivity is personal preference. Whilst the game you play can have an impact on your sensitivity, there is no special range or value that will make you better than without practice. In most situations, it's better to spend a small fraction of time checking you are on point before you shoot, rather than missing and having to spend more time fixing your aim and taking the shot again. The only scenario where it would be considered extremely difficult to react to is when you are facing someone who is pre-firing. Most of the time, you have more time than you realize. My final piece of advice is to check out the likes of Bardos, Ron Rambo Kim, Matty OW, and many more who are significantly better than me and provide more in-depth and professional advice. You should also consider joining any relevant communities to do with aiming or game titles you may play. Most people within these communities are there for similar reasons to yourself. to help others whilst improving themselves. I've gone through many revisions of this video script, trying best to simplify the information provided and cut down the video's length. Throughout my revisions, I often wondered if it was worth recounting my own experiences. In the end, I came to the conclusion of including it as a separate section in case it may be of interest to someone. If not, I at least hope the information provided in the first half was of benefit to you. Because I spent so long going back and forth on the information, a lot of what happened at the time with my own experiences has left my memory, so I'll mostly be going off faint recollections and sparse note-taking. Although I doubt I was thinking much at the time anyway. Day 1. After the initial welcome screen, I was greeted by the placement tasks. I was impressed by the clean layout and UI. I liked how it briefly broke down the number of tasks you would be doing and how to play each of the individual tasks with a visual aid to better demonstrate them. I liked Gridshot a lot because of its simplicity, and when played to a high standard, can look very impressive. I thought Microshot was a great way of demonstrating the need to focus more on your crosshair as the targets begin to get smaller and smaller. Decision Shot, I think, was my favourite overall task type in Aim Labs because it feels like more of a game rather than a simple training exercise. Detection is basically the human benchmark, and Strafe Track showed me I definitely need to put more work into my tracking. Spider Shot is a lot like Grid Shot in terms of it looks very impressive when you're good at it. I've always thought that flicking was viewed as the quote-unquote true test of skill, when in fact tracking is as equally important to aiming and deserves the same level of focus. By the end of the trial, I placed Emerald 1. I was a bit surprised that I'd done better in tracking than I thought, and I never would have imagined that flicking would be considered my weakest category. I think this may be because flicking tasks are more popular and therefore theoretically have a higher average performance rating. I'm not 100% sure that's how Aim Labs gauges their ranks. There's a highly likely chance that I just suck. After that, I went through all of the scenarios to see what tasks I enjoyed. From there, I made a playlist of my favourite ones. I wasn't too keen on the sniper rifle tasks, as they didn't really add much more other than the fact you had to zoom in and out between each shot. I got a similar feeling from the task where you had to peek a target or a target peeks you. In my opinion, you're better off practicing these things in your favourite game of choice, for example, in a deathmatch. But other than that, I enjoyed the majority of the tasks. The total number of tasks in my playlist came to around 58, which I felt was a manageable amount. Each task takes a minute at max to complete, and with the occasional break, it felt like I could easily incorporate this regime into my daily routine. It's important to take breaks. We're all human, and we suffer from diminishing returns when doing something for long periods of time. After going through this process, I finished the day at Diamond 1. I believe the drastic change in my rank is mainly down to the fact I played through all of the tasks in each of the 6 categories, which provided Aim Labs with a better insight into my abilities. Day 2. It felt fun to run through my playlist the second time around, and I even picked up a few new high scores, which is to be expected in the early days. I was surprised I managed to reach Master 4 so quickly. It's giving me false confidence that I'll be able to fly through all the ranks, but I have to be careful. With such confidence, I start to put more pressure on myself, and then it begins to lose the fun.
Power shadowing.
Fast forward to day 7, and I was right. I started to get in my own head, worrying about scores and getting distracted by myself in game. Before, a miss meant nothing. It didn't matter, I would move on. But after a while, with each playthrough, every time I missed, it would linger more and more in my mind. I started to focus less on the task and more on my failures, completely forgetting the reason why I'd taken up this challenge in the first place. But every cloud has a silver lining. It helped me to realize where my flaws were. I took a step back and found a solution to one of my main problems. I was struggling with the trajectory of my aim when flicking. I had a tendency to curve my aim when I flicked, and therefore I would constantly need to correct the shot, costing me precious time. Thankfully, Aim Labs is equipped with tasks that help work on this specific issue. With a few adjustments to my playlist, I was back on track and ready to go. On day 10, I started to notice the impact of outside factors. For example, in colder weather, it was harder to perform and took much longer for me to warm up, as I found myself needing to stretch more frequently. Although it meant I was taking longer to finish my daily routine, it was better than damaging myself by trying to fight through any discomfort. Day 11. Sometimes subtle changes can make all the difference. I changed the background and general scene from the light mode to the dark. It's easier on my eyes, and also the vibrant targets stand out better against the duller tones. I also got rid of the incredibly annoying miss indicator bloom. It's kinda hard to concentrate when you're hit by a flash of red every time you whiff a shot.
He's something!
No, something else!
No, stop saying.
A few days later, my scores and performances were wavering slightly, and sadly I deranked in tracking, which was a slight disappointment, and I foolishly let get to me more than I should have, which was ridiculous because I was still improving overall. That's a problem with being pessimistic. You tend to focus on your one failure rather than your many successes. I started to work on building up my consistency rather than fixating on my main struggle, which was to improve my speed. Thankfully, speed is something you can gain gradually with practice. The problem is you have to be patient as it takes a long time. By day 15, I was trying to find more ways to optimize my time better. I was now using the breaks I take between sets in my routine to reset my mental and regulate my breathing. Meditation is definitely something I should look into for the future, for both in-game performance and general health improvement. While playing other games, I've also started to take a 5 to 10 minute break between comp matches, occasionally hopping into a deathmatch if I feel I still need to warm up. This time also gives me a moment to reflect and clear my mind before entering into the next match. Continuing on the path of self-improvement, I started to pay more attention to my sleep schedule and made sure to stretch my legs by going for a walk each day. I thought about how I could improve my workspace more ergonomically, and somehow an online discount was enough to convince me that my problem was I needed a larger mouse pad and maybe also a wireless mouse. But that's because occasionally my mouse cable would get caught whilst playing, and I know what you're thinking. A mouse bungee would be a more sufficient and cost-effective solution, but I really wanted a good excuse for an upgrade. And I know it's a crazy coincidence, but shortly after upgrading my setup, I did reach Grandmaster 4. By the end of my run on day 20, I'd successfully secured my place within the ranks of Grandmaster, and I knew I was mere steps away from reaching GM1. The only thing standing left in my way was cognition, the one category that I'd neglected, but I wasn't going to let this final hurdle defeat me. Oh. I knew I was fortunate that the one category that was stopping me is probably the same category that is often overlooked. When envisioning aim training, I can't imagine listening out for sounds like a Mario Party minigame is what most people have in mind. I'd barely touched the tasks in cognition, and yet it was still enough to not only get me to GM1, but also get me some top scores in the categories. I know this probably wasn't the world's hardest challenge, but that doesn't matter, because I set out with a goal in mind and I completed it, and that is something I'm more proud of than any rank I could have reached. Overall, I enjoyed the challenge I set out upon myself, for the most part. The ranking system is what first caught my eye in AIM Labs and was the inspiration for this video. Although it wasn't the entire goal of my project, it did make for a great initial challenge. And whilst it may not have been the most rigorous or difficult challenge out there, I still think my time spent was beneficial to me. It helped me to develop healthier habits for my general well-being, such as getting into a routine and better planning out my schedule more, realizing the importance of sleep and finding a healthier balance to everything. AIM Labs is a tool meant to help with practice for FPS and TPS games alike. In my opinion, the ranking system acts as a gateway into taking your aim training more seriously. I wanted to try and emulate the perspective of someone who's completely new to aim training, although having thousands of hours in games already may have made that redundant. But at the same time, I wanted to set a challenge I thought I could accomplish within a reasonable period of time. My original goal was to complete a project, which meant creating a challenge and then recording my results in a chosen form, in this case being a video. From there, the idea evolved into creating more of a guide, but still, the original intention was to see something through to the end, which for me was actually harder than getting to GM1. I have a problem with giving up on things when I become unhappy with the work I'm doing. No matter how long it took me, no matter how much I procrastinated or put off the project, I wanted to see this thing through to the end. Personally, I would recommend trying out the AIM Labs ranking system, especially if you're a newer player to FPS games. And for those with a bit more experience, it could be something interesting to add to your warm-up routine. As a standalone challenge, it was fun and motivating. It taught me to focus more on the positives of practice rather than to dwell on the negatives. Whilst there are regimes and scenarios that are more game specific and situationally more appropriate, I thought the tasks I did play were beneficial for generalized gameplay. My main struggle throughout this entire process was my mental. As bizarre as it sounds, I didn't have any major difficulty in aim labs, but I kept getting stuck in the process of making the video. I realise now I'm a hypocrite for praising aim labs and its constant practice of positive reinforcement whilst not applying the same logic to myself. I have a tendency to get inside my own head, making up imaginary issues and worrying about things that haven't even happened yet. I kept questioning what the point and the purpose of the video was and ended up going through multiple revisions, restarting over and over again. I was so close to the finish, and yet I was holding myself back. Whilst it's not always the worst decision to restart something, getting fixated on the idea of perfecting it can prevent you from ever finishing. I think the key is to find a balance and understanding when it is appropriate to restart. Eventually, I realised nothing will ever be perfect, but that's okay, it shouldn't have to be. I should be doing things for the sake of self-improvement and my own enjoyment. I think the fear of public perception and validation prevents a lot of us from trying new things. The other big issue I faced is one that stumps many: time. You either never have enough of it or you have too much of it at once. It's always about perspective. Sometimes 20 days can feel like an eternity, and in others, it passes you by in the blink of an eye. I obsess over the time I've lost, believing to have been wasted, as it continues to race past me more and more, slipping through my fingertips like sand in an hourglass. We often fixate on the idea of reaching a goal in a set amount of time, and unfortunately, most of the time, if we don't, we give up. I eventually managed to overcome this issue and push through with the project. It's important to focus more on picking yourself up and getting back on track, rather than worrying about how much time you've lost and how far you may have fallen. Realizing that life doesn't always go as planned is an important lesson to learn, and you want to learn it sooner rather than later in life, whilst also accepting that it's okay to make mistakes. I hope by publishing this, I can prove to myself I'm able to see more things through to the end. I'm able to overcome my own self-doubt, and I'm able to keep going no matter the circumstances. Ironically, if I'd realised this sooner, this project probably would have been done quicker too. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a pleasant day.